Hello, I'm Dr Jodi Richardson, and you're listening to Well, Hello Anxiety, a podcast where we end the struggle with anxiety and build our toolkit of practical skills to thrive. Have you ever picked up your phone with the intention of sending a text message to a friend, only to find yourself scrolling on Instagram, your dear friend temporarily forgotten? Perhaps you've jumped onto your laptop just to check a quick email, only to find yourself lost down a Google-shaped rabbit hole. Maybe you're craving time to do deep, important work, but the digital pull to check socials, update your calendar, or, as I often find, attempt to get on top of school emails and WhatsApp messages, well, sometimes that pull is just too strong. In addition to derailing our attention and productivity, our devices are getting in the way of our connections, our ability to enjoy the beautiful moments, the unplanned opportunities just to take in a beautiful special moment during the day that actually contribute to our mental health, our overall sense of well-being and our happiness. And of course, they are fueling our anxiety. To help us change our relationship with technology, I've invited my dear friend and colleague, Dr Kristy Goodwin, back to the podcast. You may have heard Dr. Kristy meet with me and chat on the podcast for episode 26. If you haven't listened to that episode, she shared so much gold. I highly recommend popping back and having a listen when this episode is finished. Kristy is a digital wellbeing and neuroproductivity speaker, author, and researcher, and has recently published her second book, Dear Digital, We Need to Talk. Kristy, thank you so much. It is so good to see your beautiful face, and you are, of course, in pink.
Thank you, and it is brilliant to be back. Can I tell you, I got really emotional. That was such a beautiful introduction because I think we've started to forget the powerful influence, but often subtle influence that technology is having on all of us. Because let's face it, it has got its tentacles into every part of our lives. And I think that if we're not in control, that technology has the potential to rob us of our most important resources, our time and attention. You know, as you were talking about those precious moments with loved ones, you know, sending your friend a text message, but you get derailed by, you know, the plethora of other digital distractions. It is just such an important thing, I think, that we learn to take back control of our tech so it's not controlling us. So thank you. That was a really lovely introduction.
Oh, you're so welcome. And thank you for the work that you do. And I know that this work is dear to your heart, that the work you do is equally personal as it is professional. And it was really spurred by a family event that occurred back in 2015. Can you tell us what happened?
Sure. So in 2015, I had two children at the time. I've since acquired a third child. It sounds so easy when you say that, since I had a third child. I had been given the very lucky opportunity of speaking at a conference for Apple in Singapore. So I flew to Singapore for 2 nights, and it was the first time that I'd left our youngest son at the time, Billy. So I'd left for 2 nights, and I landed back at Sydney's airport, and I did what most people do at the baggage carousel, and I pulled out my phone, and I saw that I had a huge number of emails that had amassed during the flight back from Singapore. And I thought, I'll triage those in the taxi ride home. Well, got in the taxi and fell asleep. So when I got back home, I thought that I might check those emails later on. But Billy came to me. So he was about 15 to 18 months at the time. And Billy came up and he decided he needed some extra mummy cuddles that day. We'd been apart for 2 nights and he needed to top up his love cup. As an overachiever, I had very ambitiously thought that during his expected nap time, I'd have a conference call. And this is back prior to COVID. So this was when, you know, a Skype call was a really big deal. So I had a Skype call scheduled, and then I knew that there was no way I could do that Skype call. He was not having a nap. So I opened the lid on my laptop just to send one email. And that awful red notification bubble, that declares how many unread emails. I feel like it screams at you. The fact, and it's no accident, red is a psychological trigger for urgency and danger. The fact that there's a metric inside that bubble that tells you exactly how many unread DMs or messages or emails, well, it had blown out. It was a 3-figure number now, declaring how many unread emails I'd amassed from not only the flight home, but then the taxi ride as well. Now, I got sucked into the digital vortex. I started trying to triage that avalanche of emails in my inbox, and I wasn't watching Billy, even though I just went to send one to cancel the work call. And as I was digitally distracted, Billy fell from the adjacent lounge where I was triaging my inbox, face first onto the ground, and he acquired a very, very significant laceration to his lip. Now, as any parent knows, a mouth injury results in copious amounts of blood. And on this particular occasion, it has never ever happened since. As a mum to 3 boys, my boys never wear light-coloured t-shirts. But as serendipity would have it, on this day, he was wearing a lemon-coloured t-shirt. And when I say it was covered in blood, it literally did not look yellow. He was rushed to emergency and required urgent hospitalisation and treatment for his lip. And he still to this day has a little scar on his lip as a concrete reminder. Now, I'm somebody who researches, studies, talks about digital distraction, but it was my own lived experience where I realised, technology had controlled me. I had become so distracted. I wasn't supervising my toddler at the time. And it really was the impetus for me to sort of almost change tack. Up until that point, I'd been studying the impact of screens on kids and teens, but I recognised we as adults are just as digitally distracted, just as digitally dependent, but we often rationalise it under the guise of, I need it for work, or I need to be organising a play date or paying a bill. And there's certainly justifiable reasons, but I think many of us have developed some unhealthy digital dependency. So that really was the catalyst for me to say, what is it about the online world that draws us in? What sucks us into that digital vortex? And that's what led to sort of the shift in the work that I do as well.
Thank you for sharing that story with us, because I can imagine how you felt. And I think any mum listening who's had a child have an accident on their watch knows that sickening feeling, the guilt, just the regret. And I wonder how you came to forgive yourself for what happened that day. Was that process a drawn out process? Did you seek some help? How did you go with that?
Yeah, couple of things. First and foremost, to ease my mother's guilt, I just want to declare that he'd actually sustained a very similar injury about 2 weeks prior when my husband was dutifully supervising him. Billy was a climber. Maggie Dent talks about roosters and lambs. He was our rooster. He was ready to attack the world. So I'm just going to suggest that the injury he sustained with me was perhaps a reopening of an existing wound or scar. So that's one way I rationalised it. But to be honest, even still to this day, whilst I've processed the event and understand, I live by Maya Angelou's beautiful saying that when you know better, you do better. And I don't necessarily still feel that intense guilt that I certainly did for weeks and months after the experience. But for me, it was an opportunity to say, look, collectively, we've all got to do better. I got off relatively lucky. And Billy may not say that with the little protrusion on his lip today. In fact, he likes it. He told me that it looks like he's really tough. And he doesn't tell people it's an injury from when he was a little boy. He tells people now it was a football injury, apparently. So maybe I've bolstered his self-esteem in some way. But I think we've got to, I think it was, for me, it was the impetus to start saying, what is it about the online world that draws us in? Why are we as adults becoming so distracted and dependent on it? So it was an opportunity to reevaluate my habits. And I knew from having conversations with other people that they were struggling with this, often in silence. Many of us think we're the only person who's feeling overwhelmed and stressed and distracted. And the reality is, and I think that's part of our vernacular today, you ask anyone at the moment how they are, and they answer with one of the 2 Bs. They either say, I'm busy or I'm burnt out. And I'm finding this across all walks of life with males and females. And I think in many regards, it's our tech habits that is contributing. It's certainly not the only reason, but our tech habits are contributing to this sense. So my awful experience really was that catalyst for me to, first of all, examine my habits, and then to, look more globally and at a macro perspective of what is it as adults that draws us in.
I really appreciate how you pivoted or pirouetted, as I know you like to say. You said you did a digital pirouette in COVID, which I think it's so beautiful. I love the way you use the English language. The change that you took, the change of direction that you took in terms of your work, I think is so powerful, because we as adults influence the young people in our lives. And now not everyone listening will be a parent, but we are influenced by the way people use technology around us. And if we're at a table and other people are on their technology, they're on their phones, then sometimes we can just go, well, I'm just going to pick mine up too. And also the fact that what I've really picked up is that having that experience, that very stressful and distressing personal experience, really lasered your focus. And it was because of what happened to Billy. And I wonder if you can help us learn today, how can we leverage what's around us and think about the people around us to help change our digital habits without the need for bloody T-shirts and racing to the emergency department?
Yes, and I don't wish that upon anybody. I really firmly believe that it's not about doing a digital detox. It's not about cancelling your Netflix subscription. It's not, outdated suggestions like that. The reality is that technology is here to stay. So we have to learn to live with it, but to do so in healthy and helpful ways. And what I found was that my experience with Billy really nudged me to take a good look at what I was doing. I think for years as adults, we've wagged the finger at our kids and said they're addicted, they're distracted, that, they can't put it down. But I don't think we've critically examined how we've been sort of almost swept up in this tsunami of screens. And I think we as adults need to be good digital role models. If we are struggling with this, can we start to appreciate where our younger people with developing brains, with developing self-regulation skills, might be impacted and affected by technology? And so for me, I started to, and again, knowing what I know about the brain, and that the brain has mirror neurons, meaning that we are biologically designed to imitate and copy. We can espouse that kids need to turn their devices off or they need to put it down, but if we're not walking the talk, they will imitate the behaviours that they're observing. So for me, it was saying, well, I don't want my kids to see me constantly using technology. Now, I'm not for a moment suggesting we should never use our devices around our kids. That's unrealistic. They certainly need to see us using them, but they also need to see us turning them off. And so I think we really need to start to think about, as we approach the end of our lives, and I'm not saying that's happening right now, but when we get there, do we want to look back and lament the fact that we spent so many hours on our devices? In the book, I share a really sobering statistic that many people have repeated back to me, and that is, at the moment, it is estimated that the average Australian adult will spend the equivalent of 17 years of their life on their phone. Imagine when we add in TV, imagine when we add in laptops and desktops, that is a huge proportion of our time. And as I said at the beginning, the tech that we use both professionally and personally has been designed. It has been deliberately engineered to rob us of our time and our attention. I don't want my kids to remember their childhood with their mother being constantly tethered to technology. And I don't want to get to the end of my life and regret that I gave away so much of my time and attention to my devices. I hear many people say they get their weekly, if they're really brave, they actually look at it. I know a lot of people get their weekly, on iOS uses their screen time report, and Android uses it's their digital wellbeing report. I know a lot of people get the message and just delete it because they know it will be too confronting. But looking at that can be a really sobering reminder of just how much time we've given away to these devices.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. And it's something that actually I'm going to revisit. I've made a lot of changes since we last spoke. And yet I still, and what's interesting is that the pull is still there. The pull is still there. And yet I've set a 15-minute timer on Instagram. And I find now, because if I do a reel, oh my gosh, it takes me 15 minutes. I'm like, I've got to ignore that limit because I'm really slow. But you can say, give me 1 more minute or give me 15 more minutes. And I think at the worst, if I say, please give me 15 more minutes, I use please all the time. I even ask artificial intelligence using my manners. It's just the way I was raised.
I would expect nothing less from you.
Google, can you please play this song? Yes, at least I know that as a maximum, that's half an hour on Instagram a day. And I'm in there, and I do find myself jumping in there to reply to a comment or to check out what some of my friends are doing. It's just so magnetic. And the last time earlier today when I was having a bit of a look before CrossFit, I was just like, actually consciously thought, I want to put this down. I want to go in and say good day to my mates and start warming up. But I could just, it was that dilemma of, in my head, this is what I'm saying I want to do, but all of my neurotransmitters were saying just a little bit longer, just a little bit longer. And yesterday, even my daughter asked, can we go and play some table tennis after school? And I was like, of course we can, because that's what I want to be doing. But there was a part of me that was like, oh, I've just got a few more things I need to check, because we're becoming almost automated as humans, just reaching for devices and leaning on those devices for those hits of dopamine, aren't we?
We are. And I want to legitimize what's happening for you and for me, because I'm not immune to that as well, that digital pull. And again, there's so many persuasive design techniques. One of the reasons that we gravitate towards our screens, the thing you were describing before of, just keep scrolling on social media, even though you wanted to go into CrossFit with your friends, is that it's the infinite scroll. The online world, we will never feel done. We will never feel complete. There's always one more episode, one more social media post, one more tab that we can open. We feel like we are never done. And it's referred to sometimes as the state of insufficiency. And the state of insufficiency tells us that as humans, we have a completion bias. We want to feel, this is why we love ticking things off our to-do list, because we have a sense of completion. But in the online world, we just feel like we're never done. And again, that's no accident. The fact that we never know, we call it the unpredictable reward ratio. So if you knew that on Instagram, there'd be something funny, entertaining, lighthearted every 58 minutes and 10 seconds, we wouldn't go in and keep on checking. But it's that unpredictable reward ratio that gets us hooked into constantly going in there. So it's working, again, against our neurobiology, and that's why we have to put some strategies in place. So I love the fact that you set the timer. And again, you acknowledge it's super easy to override, but I feel like it's enough of a psychological nudge to ask you to at least examine the amount of time, because it's not often until people get their weekly report of how much time they've spent online, and suddenly, when you see you've spent 12 hours a week on Instagram, that can be enough to sort of shake you by the shoulders. So I love that that's one of the strategies you've really applied. And I often say the basics work if you work the basics. So it's not a convoluted, complicated thing. I haven't told you to take Instagram, off your phone or delete it forever. Another really simple strategy I find people can use, if it's social media that's sort of your Achilles heel, 2 strategies. One is to take your tech temptations off the home screen on your phone. So if it's Instagram or Snapchat or TikTok, or maybe you have a sports team that you follow, maybe it's a news site, take that icon off the home screen. That's prime real estate, and drag it onto the 5th slide on your phone and tuck it in there. The other strategy, and I call these micro habits, the other micro habit that works really well is to log out of the app. Now, I know that you can log back in, but that intermediary step of having to remember your password, and let's face it, we can't remember the 82,000 password combinations. We start saying, hang on, was that my mother's maiden name and my first son's date of birth combination? We've got digital dementia. Our memory-making capacity has shrunk. So those sort of intermediary steps where you have to, and you've got to remember the uppercase letter and the character that you used as well, that can be enough to sort of add some friction. One of the reasons that we get sucked into the digital vortex now is because it's frictionless. If you've got facial recognition, you don't even have to enter your passcode to unlock your phone, and off you go down that slippery slope. So just trying to add some intermediary steps to make it, I guess, a little less sticky, and also help us giving up a lot of our time on these devices.
Thank you. And I love one of the other habits, and we're going to talk about some other tech habits in a moment. It's probably worth me mentioning some of the things that I've changed since we last spoke. So one of the things I've done is I've put it out of my line of sight. And that's whilst I'm working, I'll leave it where I can't see it. I'll leave it in the kitchen at night when I'm signing off for the day and sitting down for my 1 hour of Netflix. If anyone hasn't watched You yet, oh my gosh, it was amazing. So highly recommend.
Good.
So I feel like that's a real unwind for me, that 1 hour of TV. Pete and I will sit down, kids are in bed or getting ready for bed. I always have to get up and do kisses and cuddles with our daughter. Our son's not into that anymore.
Oh, how broken.
I know. I've also got Do Not Disturb on, so I silence all notifications. In fact, I probably annoy a lot of people in my WhatsApp groups because I don't have any notifications enabled. And when I go into WhatsApp or I go into Viber, I chat with my brother. My mum and I have a group with him he lives in the UK on Viber. Sometimes mum has to send me a text message and say, check Viber, your brother wants to ask you something. But sometimes there can be, and I kid you not, in the cricket WhatsApp group, there were 182 messages there the other day. And I thought, what if they were coming through as notifications? So they are just a few of the things that I have changed. And I've made other changes in our home with our children. And that's not just with respect to where their phones are. I've set a limit on our daughter's phone. I've set limits on our son's phone. We've got limits on gaming. It's just reining it in. So we're in control and we're making the choices, that the choices are not being made for us by default.
Oh, well done. I feel like a proud parent hearing those strategies. And I love, you've picked really doable things. Like, it's not that complicated to put your phone somewhere where you can't see it when you don't want to be distracted, when you want to go on a date with your partner and be present, when you want to sit down and have a conversation with an important person in your life, putting your phone away. Overwhelmingly, the research tells us that just seeing our phone, even if it is on silent and do not disturb, will have an impairment on our cognitive performance. We know that just the presence of a phone at a meal area changes the quality and quantity of the conversation. We have more surface level conversation because there's almost like a perception that we're going to be distracted. Even the way we report an experience, if a phone is present, we often have a more superficial recount of the experience. So I love you've picked really, really doable, attainable things that we could all experiment with, I guess.
That's the thing about it. It's the same as when our daughters had to go back on gluten-free. Listeners of the podcast long-term will know that we've had our ups and downs with her health. And our naturopath, she's so cool, Nick Top, she was a guest as well. She just said, look, it's just one big experiment. It's just, let's try these gluten-free foods from the supermarket, and we're not married to them. We'll try them. If we love them, we'll get them again. If we don't, well, we chalk it up to experience. And people can really try. The habits that you share are so practical and they're so easy. So many of them are so easy. You know, my Instagram's in a folder on another page on my phone, things like that. Just so that you're not looking at your phone when you're going to check the weather, or the Compass app for your kids' classes for the day if they need you to say, which room am I in? I'm running late for first period. Easily applicable. And you can go, right, if this works for me, great, I'll stick with it. And what happens is you make the change and you just get used to it. You adapt, and then it becomes a permanent fixture.
Yeah, and can I add, for me, at first, even though I wrote about this, the idea of what you described it as managing your WhatsApp notifications. So you can now, if you're not aware of this, listeners, you can now bundle or batch your notifications, not just with WhatsApp, with just about all social media apps, with all web-based tools, so with Teams, certainly with emails, and you can now nominate what time or times of the day you want the plethora of alerts and notifications coming to you, rather than sort of dribbling in throughout the day. And for me, I was really reluctant, with mum of three boys who are involved in a lot of sport activities and class groups. The thought of putting pause on WhatsApp and bundling those notifications, I was a little reluctant. Even though I suggested, I was a little reticent to do so myself. And I thought, I'll give it a go. I'm going to see if this really does work. And I tried it, and I cannot tell you two things. One, the most tangible, profound impact on my perceived sense of feeling anxious and overwhelmed was almost instant. And our brain cannot differentiate between a TikTok notification and a Teams notification and a tiger chasing us. We have brains that are biologically designed to go and hunt and forage and get information. So we are designed to go and seek it. We are not designed to have information constantly thrust at us via alerts, sounds, notifications, vibrations. It literally triggers a stress response in our brains and activates that sympathetic nervous system. So for me, my anxiety, I realized, was not particularly significant, but removing that sort of digital intruder really had a huge impact on my perception of how anxious and stressed I felt. The other thing that I noticed was I think technology has conditioned us to think that everything is urgent and important, and it's not. I decided, because I just wanted an intermediary step, I didn't want to be the mum who didn't get the message that tomorrow's, costume day at school, or you needed 50 cents for the cake stall. And I didn't want to know that football training had been called off when I arrived at the ground because I didn't get the WhatsApp message. So I asked a couple of friends in each of the various WhatsApp groups to be almost like a watch person for me. And I said, look, if something of an urgent nature comes through on the Year 4 class group, can you please just flick me a text? Now, I know people might think, well, aren't you just adding to your load there? Can I tell you, while I did this experiment for 3 weeks, I thought I'm just going to give 3 weeks because that'll be enough time to iron out any idiosyncrasies. I did not get one single text message from my friends with an urgent message. It can wait. So I now bundle my WhatsApp notifications till around 7:30 or 8 p.m, depending on the days of the week, at night when I'm in a better headspace to deal with them. And then I can add the things to my calendar or know what I need to do at that point in time. But I just think we've been duped into thinking that everything is urgent and important. And we've created this hyper-responsive culture that is so detrimental, not only to our well-being, but also detrimental to our productivity. Because when we are distracted, and it doesn't matter if it's your child interrupting you when you're trying to do some focused work, it doesn't matter if it's the ping of an email or a WhatsApp message, we know it takes the average adult around 23 minutes to get back into deep focused mode. It's called the resumption lag. So I think, we see them as harmless and benign, but constantly being peppered with digital distractions is hugely detrimental to well-being and productivity.
It really is. And it's productivity beyond the surface, the getting the emails answered, to updating your calendar. We're both professional speakers and we have client calls to make, and we have these operational tasks with our businesses, which I know you love just as I do, to chat to a client, to talk together about how we can really meet their needs and help solve some of their problems and support their staff, whether it's staff for you in more of your corporate work or for me in schools, and talking to parents or talking to teachers or talking to students, but also in workplaces. It's so meaningful, and it's a huge part of what we do. But then you and I, we both like to create more resources to support our communities and our clients. And so that requires creativity. It requires time. It requires deep thinking and focus. Those of us who are anxious, it's biting me in the bum, must I say. I don't normally say that, but it's really biting me in the bum, this idea that I live by, which is you can be anxious and you can do it anyway. You can sit down and design that book, that course, that workshop, that new business. You can do it even if your anxiety comes with you. And the reason I say it's biting me in the backside is because I was on a phone call with a friend yesterday and we were talking about a theme park here in Victoria called Gumbai World that's got this horrendous ride called the Rebel. And I was there on a school excursion. I took some time away from screens to be on the grade 6 excursion with my daughter and her classmates. And one of my mates, one of the other mums, Tina, said, come on, Jodes, do you want to come on it with me? And I'm like, damn you. You've gone and asked me. And my motto is, I won't let anxiety stop me. I won't. And it's even, goodness, even at SeaWorld and Wet and Wild, oh my gosh, those water slides where the bottom drops out, I did it. And then I actually was so exhilarated I did it again, but the anxiety, my heart was in my throat. And so when we're anxious, everything about that stress response wires us to retreat away from danger, away from uncertainty, away from challenge. And yet, if we are totally digitally distracted and we never get a hold of the pull, we'll never, in conjunction with the way digital devices can fuel our anxiety, can rob us of our creativity if we're just not able to have the time and space to really let ideas evolve and bubble up to the surface, and stopping us from setting aside that time, then it can really rob us of experiences, opportunities, and different directions in our life professionally as well, that will see us at the end of our days feeling like we wish we'd done something different. And I don't want to feel that way. You don't want to feel that way. And we don't want you as listeners to feel that way, which is probably a good place for me to ask you about these invisible habits that I know you speak and write about. They're not obvious to us, but once they're brought to our attention, we're like, oh yeah, oh yeah, I could make some change there. What are these invisible habits that you like to teach about?
Yeah, so I think our tech habits, and again, both professionally and personally, have done two things, and they've happened at the same time. The first thing that's happened is that our tech habits have added tiny little micro stresses, like little assaults to our day. Now, as humans, we are designed to cope with stress, but we are biologically designed to cope with very short periods of stress, and we are designed to resolve whatever the stressor was. So tiger chased us, we'd run into a cave, short burst of stress, problem solved. But in today's digitally demanding world, where we're peppered with alerts, notifications, we're on constant video calls, we're multitasking, we're working for really long stretches of time, we are being bombarded with tiny little micro stressors, and these accumulate into our day. So alerts and notifications, we know video meetings conclusively from brain scans increase cortisol levels and increase our sense of overwhelm and fatigue. So there's tiny little micro stressors are occurring at frequency and at a cadence that our brain's just not accustomed to experiencing. The second thing that's happening at the same time is that our tech habits have eroded some of the biological buffers that used to help us naturally manage our stress and, I believe, our anxiety. We used to sleep way more and with better quality than what many of us do today, and our tech habits are one of, not the only reason, but are a contributing factor to our poor sleep. We used to be far more physically active than what we are today, and we know physical activity makes a whole lot of neurochemicals that help us manage stress. Having a very narrow gaze. The research tells us that when we look at a screen, it triggers the stress response, because as humans, we are biologically designed to look at things in the distance, to dilate our gaze, and yet we're spending hours upon hours of our days having a very, very narrow gaze, looking at things close distance. Even the way that we breathe, believe it or not, has been shaped by our screens. We should sigh as humans roughly every 5 minutes, and it's our body's natural built-in biological mechanism to help us regulate our stress response. It sort of regulates our oxygen and carbon dioxide levels. But again, when we're looking at a screen, we don't sigh. In fact, what we think is happening is in many instances we hold our breath. And so when we're not breathing the way we should to send a message to our body that we are calm, that we are safe, what happens is we trigger that stress response. And again, for people that experience anxiety, this can often exacerbate some of these issues. So I think it's the interplay of those two things, little micro stresses and the erosion of biological buffers. And again, we're often not even aware that our breathing has changed, that we've got a very narrow gaze, that alerts and notifications, that video calls are actually stressing us. And they are often in, as you said, invisible ways.
Yes, and it got me thinking that we can give ourselves some grace when we are exhausted at the end of the day. If we have been on like right now, we can see one another, and yet we could just as easily turn off our videos and have a conversation without, because we're both professional speakers, we both look at the camera. So we're not even looking at each other.
Yeah, and a really simple remedy for that, because I know perhaps a lot of your listeners probably do have a fairly good dose of Zoom fatigue, or Zoom gloom as people are now calling it. But a really, really simple strategy is to just close your eyes for 30 seconds when you start to feel like you're overwhelmed, because what's happening in your brain is your occipital lobe, which processes what you see, and another part of your brain called your fusiform gyrus that processes faces in particular, they're working overtime, especially if you've got multiple people on like a Brady Bunch style grid view. Your brain is working overtime compared to if we met in a cafe or if we met in a board meeting or a boardroom where our eyes would move around and we wouldn't fix on one person. We'd move around a lot more. But again, when we're very rigid, when we're sort of darting our eyes between all the different faces, and let's be honest, we're looking at everybody's backgrounds and what's happening in their backgrounds, our brain gets really stressed. So a really simple solution is to close your eyes just for 30 seconds. Closing your eyes will give your occipital lobe a rest. It gives your fusiform gyrus a rest. And the good news is you can do it on video calls. And so long as you're not speaking, just pretend that your internet has dropped out for a moment. So sit very still. A really simple thing that we can do that has a profound effect. Making sure that perhaps during the day we have some time where we look out in the distance, training our eye not just to have that very narrow gaze, but to dilate our gaze. Getting in some sunlight, all simple things, again, that in the sunlight we know can have lots of benefits. Sunlight in the first hour of waking up can help reset our circadian rhythm, believe it or not. It's a magical biological mechanism that roughly 16 hours later your body will start to produce the sleep hormone melatonin, which I just think is magic. So just getting that sun exposure in the morning, getting it throughout the day. We need roughly 90 minutes of sunlight interspersed throughout our day to help offset myopia, which is nearsightedness. So they're really simple things that we can put in place to counter our digital habits and try and rectify this situation.
Yes, thank you. And those ideas are very, very easy to do. And one of the ways that I just love it, and my daughter hears it now, and she'll say, "Oh, it's time to breathe, Mum." I use Plum Village, which is a free app, and it's Thich Nhat Hanh's app, and there's a meditation bell on the bottom of the app that you can press, and you can set it to sound the bell at whatever interval you like, and it can start at a certain time of the day and end at a certain time of the day. So it's kind of like 9 till 7, I have this bell sound every 30 minutes. And it's a reminder to me, this is another thing I learned from you, is the email apnea, the screen apnea, the holding of the breath. Every 30 minutes, I will put my feet on the ground, ground myself, feel that connection between my feet and the floor. So I'm becoming present moment focused. And I will use cyclic breathing, which is the double inhalation through the nose and a long exhalation through the mouth. I'll do 3 rounds of that. It's a mini mindful moment that'll reset my nervous system and enable me to shake off some of that cumulative stress. I'll also use that bell as a reminder to get up, because it's very easy just to stay put because of that draw, that magnetic pull, and not to stretch our legs. And sitting is the new smoking. There's so
It
much
really
that
is.
is, the vaping is the new smoking. I mean, there's so
Yeah.
much that is the new smoking, but it's essentially it's just not good for us. And I think that one of the key takeaways that I've got from this conversation is this idea that day to day to day, what we do adds up. And whether or not we are being lured by the pull, that dopamine fueled pull of our devices and the infinite scroll and all of the persuasive design designed to keep us picking our devices up and looking, whether we do that and we go in one direction, or whether we start to implement even just a few micro habits. And your book is full of so much practical advice, and I'll put the link to Dr. Kristy's book in the show notes. We're at a choice point and we can go in one direction or another, because now we know. Now we know, and we know what we can do, and it's not onerous. But by the time we get to the end of those roads, Kristy can see me pointing left and pointing right, but by the time we get to the end of those roads, we'll have lived a very different life depending on which way we go. And it's not nice to think about death, and it's not nice to think about those last regrets. But if we don't, then we'll only just amplify the regrets. And it's uncomfortable, yes, but it's so worthwhile. So if nothing else, have a think about the big picture, because what Dr. Kristy teaches and shares, and what this conversation has really brought to the fore, is this idea that, like with Billy, you were really motivated by something that happened to someone else in your life. And often we might need to turn to how our choices are affecting other people, even if we are not motivated to do it for ourselves. But think about the big picture is my call out to you today, and take some time to really reflect on what small changes you could make that can really change that trajectory for you.
May I share a story? I don't know if I shared this in our last episode, but I think it
Please.
just sums up what you've just beautifully articulated. And it gave me goosebumps when you were talking then, because try not to cry. It's just,
Oh,
like I really don't want any of us to look back and regret the time that we gave away to these, and they've been designed to be addictive and persuasive. If you haven't watched The Social Dilemma, please watch it and realize some of the mechanisms that are built into the technology that we all use and love. But I wanted to share a story, and it's in the book, and her mum gave me permission to share it. But she picked her daughter up from school one day, and her daughter turned and said to her mum, "Mummy, how much do you earn per hour?" And her mum mistook her daughter's question, thinking, "Oh, my daughter's ambitious. She must want to know what I earn so she can emulate the sort of career I have." And she said, "Look, sweetheart, I earn a salary. I'd need to do some calculations, but I'll get back to you." She tucked her daughter into bed that night, and she said to her daughter, "Sweetheart, I figured out my hourly rate. This is what it is. Why do you ask?" And this young girl turned and said to her mum, "Because I'd like to buy an hour of your time without your phone." We just don't get this time back. We really don't. And I don't want to live a life where my anxiety and stress is exacerbated because of the tech that I feel I need to be responsive to. And, we salivate like Pavlov's dogs every time we get an alert or notification. I don't want to be a slave to my screen. And I also don't want to get to the end of my life and realize that I have literally spent years of my life tethered to a technology. And it's not an anti-tech message, I couldn't live without it. I really couldn't, but I just don't want it to be the dominant feature in my life. And I think, as you beautifully articulated, we're at a critical point in time, and where it's a time where I think we sort of got sucked up into this excitement of screens and social media and new technologies. And I think we're on the verge of even more immersive technologies with the metaverse and AI and all the other new technologies on the horizon. I think we've got to really critically examine our tech habits. Otherwise, we're going to be in a very different position, and that terrifies me in some regards.
yeah. And so thank you for sharing that story. I actually am wiping tears away from my eyes. I've read that story in your book,
Yeah.
but hearing you relay it in that way is just so powerful. And we don't get as much time with our kids, for those of us that are parents, as we think we will. They're only little for such a short time. This is a small 2-month window where I have a 13 and a 14-year-old, soon to be 13 and 15. And I'm thinking, he's 3 years off being a licensed driver.
Oh, wow.
And because of my anxiety, because of the way anxiety affects the hippocampus, our storage and retrieval of information, because it affects attention and how focused we are on what is important in the moment, it draws our attention to whatever perceived threat is triggering that response. Our memories are affected when we live with anxiety, and that's certainly the case for me. And I feel as though that alone is an influence on my recollection of life with my family. And I don't want my devices like you don't want yours. And like every listener, we want to be in charge of our time. Like you said at the start, our time and our attention are our most precious resources. And we are better equipped after this conversation to think differently about changing our relationship. I think we've got to change the way we think about it and really look big picture and experience that discomfort of, well, what is my life going to look like in X number of years if I continue on this road? Or can I hop off this train and get on a different one and start to make a few small changes that will accumulate over time to making a really big difference? And so I'm ever so grateful for you and your work and for sharing your very precious time. I know how busy you are, very precious time with us here today.
My pleasure, and thank you for what you do and for this opportunity. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Kristy. And if you found this conversation helpful, please share it with someone. Please share it with someone. Have a think about who's in your circle that might really benefit from listening into the conversation that Dr. Kristy and I have had today. And if I can support your school with professional development for teachers or your parents or your students, please reach out and let me know. I am a professional keynote speaker It's work that I absolutely adore because of my passion for this topic. And if you are a parent, perhaps you might mention to your school that I am available to come and support the school community in any way that's needed. Thanks again for joining us, and I will see you next week. Bye. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a review. To keep the conversation going, I'd love you to join me over on Instagram. You'll find me at Dr Jodi Richardson. Also, if you'd like a copy of my free 5-day mini email course, Calm Your Anxious Brain, then jump over to my website, drjodirichardson.com, and you can sign up down the bottom. I've really enjoyed having your company. Thanks so much. See you next time.